Hey, good evening, everyone. It is August 28th, 2024, 6 o'clock p.m. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Northern Regional Advisory Council meeting. This meeting is being held in person at the Weber County Commission chambers, as well as being streamed live on YouTube. This public forum allows you to express your opinions and ideas on wildlife management in our state. The RAC considers your feedback on the proposals before us today and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is charged with setting wildlife policy for our state. Wildlife management is complex and sometimes it's emotionally charged. We all have ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah's wildlife. It's why we are here today, and that's a good thing. We encourage those who want to express their opinion at today's meeting to fill out a comment card. Well, we expect those in attendance to respect the people who speak, especially those who hold views that don't align with their own. Respectful behavior helps facilitate efficient meetings where RAC members can listen, digest, and address the concerns, ideas, and proposals being presented for consideration. Disrespectful behavior includes booing, yelling, cheering, or laughing while someone is speaking. You can also help maintain a respectful space by referring to people by name instead of descriptors of their physical characteristics, demeanor, or gender. If this behavior occurs, the RAC Chair will remind the attendees to be respectful. If the behavior continues, the applicable individual or individuals will be asked to leave. Lastly, please help reduce distractions during the meeting by putting your phone on silent. And if you need to take a call, we ask that you step outside. One other note of business for us as we exit tonight, we have been asked to exit out the front doors out the west side of the building, please. Okay, would like to welcome our RAC members. We will go through and do some introductions. I want to start over here.
James Carlson, public at large.
Jamie Butler, non-consumptive user.
Ryan Brown, at large.
Rob Dale, public at large.
Ross Worthington, at large.
Darren Perry, Shoshone Nation.
We also have online Marshall.
Good afternoon, Marshall Alford, National Forest System Lands.
And I'm Brad Buchanan, representing Sportsman. So we will excuse tonight David Earl, Junior Goring, Randy Hutchinson, Casey Snyder, and Steve Sorensen. And, sorry, Nikki Wayman. Okay. We do want to welcome our DWR staff, specifically those that provided presentations and are available to answer questions throughout the meeting. Alan Ward, Craig Walker, Trina Hedrick, and Chelsea Duke. We welcome the public that are attending in person, that are watching on YouTube. Those that are attending in person will have the opportunity to provide comments regarding any agenda item. If you wish to make a comment, you must fill out the comment card in the back for the item you wish to address and see that we receive it prior to the RAC discussion. The public that are watching on YouTube will not be able to provide live comments during the meeting. However, the presentations were provided for viewing online, and the public was able to provide comments to the RAC members for this meeting. It's perfect timing. We can have. You can want to introduce yourself?
Hi, sorry I'm late. Nikki Wayment from Hawkwatch International, and I represent non-consumptive users.
Thank you. All right. Takes care of the introductory part of it. We will call for an approval of the agenda and minutes from the last meeting.
I'll make a motion to where the agenda is presented.
I'll second.
Motion by Ross, seconded by Ryan. Call for a vote. Darren?
Aye.
Ross?
Yes.
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 Marshall?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. All right. We'll give a brief update from our last board meeting, which was back in June. Try and work my way through this, sorry. The first motion that was made was to ask the division to look into the viability of selling green pelts for both bear and cougar. This was to be placed on the action log. That passed unanimously. The next motion was that we amend the division's rule language to reflect that a hunter may bring a maximum of 4 guests unless otherwise authorized by the CWMU operator. That passed 3 in favor with 1 recusal. Next motion was to move that we accept the division's recommendations on the 90% acreage requirement to qualify for a variance. That passed 2 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 recusal. Next motion was to accept the balance of the division's recommendations as presented. That passed 3 in favor with 1 recusal. Those were all under the CWMU rule amendments. For the conservation permit program rule amendment, we had a motion to ask the division to look at a consistent sheep hunt ending date. This was to be placed on the action log, and that passed unanimously. Next motion was to accept the balance of the division's recommendation as presented. That passed 3 in favor, 1 recusal. And for the conservation permit list, motion to approve the permit list as presented by the division. That passed 3 in favor with 1 recusal. And there's one other business item. Had a motion to ask the division to explore the concept of banking dedicated hunter hours prior to joining the program. This was also to be placed on the action log, and that passed unanimously. Any questions about the last board meeting from anyone?
I just, one clarification. Did they limit the CWMU guests to 4, or was it a vehicle, number of the people in the vehicle?
It was 2-4. Anything above that was with the operator approval, so. Okay, now give some time to Blair for regional supervisor update.
All right. So as always, we have a ton of stuff going on here in the region, so I'm excited to share that with you tonight. Is Mike over there?
I'm right here.
Okay, I couldn't see you.
Should be coming up now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we'll start with our wildlife section employees. So they've been pretty busy this last couple months. One of the things we've been working on is bringing in some bighorn sheep from Nevada. And so we've got about 20 sheep now out on Promontory Point in our nursery facility. So 17 of those are used, 3 rams. We're excited to have them out there, and hopefully we can build that group of sheep up and start moving some sheep around the state. We've also been working on elk and pronghorn classifications on all of our units, collecting data that we use for our models and for permit recommendations here coming up in a couple months. And we're also going to be releasing some chuckers. And so we'll be doing those on the 20th for the youth hunt. And then again, the following week for the general opener for the chucker hunt, which will start on the 27th. Then we've also been doing quite a few bat and pygmy rabbit surveys around the region to monitor those populations and collect more data on them. We've also been dealing with a lot of bear issues, so you've probably seen some of these in the news. Between us and the central region, it's been keeping us all pretty busy. We've had some in Cache County and Blacksmith Fork Canyon, where we've seen some sightings of bears, but they haven't been getting into too much trouble. We've had a group of bears come into Cinnamon Creek Campground just above the reservoir up there. And we've tried to catch those. We had hounds run through that canyon. We weren't able to actually find them, and they've since left. So that's a good sign. Hopefully they don't show up somewhere else. Summit County, we also had a couple issues where we had some in Soapstone Campground. We tried to catch that one as well, and it eventually left and then got into some more trouble with some of our dispersed campers up in that area, and we ended up having to put that one down. And then we have been working on one as well up in the Weber Canyon that's been getting into some camps up there. So kind of the bottom line with all these bear issues, bears are hungry right now. We haven't had a good berry crop. Mass crop's probably not going to be great. And so they're just looking for food. So if you are out and about in the next couple months, especially out in the woods, make sure you're keeping a good clean camp. Keep your garbage picked up. Just keep food off the ground and stored, and that'll help keep bears out of your camp and keep bears safe. So just keep that in mind if you're out and about. Our waterfowl biologists have been busy spraying Phragmites, so that they do a whole month-long effort out in the Great Salt Lake marshes. So this is their 4th consecutive week of spraying Phragmites, and they should be wrapping that up next week. A lot of what we've been doing the last couple of years has been from the air. So we hire a helicopter to spray, and they've done about 4,000 acres, and a good portion of that has been in the Willard Spur WMA. So next couple of years, you should see a lot of that opening up and a lot more good habitat out there. And by the time they're done, they'll be doing around 5,000 acres on 7 of our WMAs. So it's a huge effort, a lot of time, but it really pays off and really provides a lot more food for birds out in our WMAs. In addition to that, they've been banding ducks by night. So they banded about 1,600 ducks this last month. 48 of those were, we used a modus tagged attachment to the back of those ducks. It's kind of like pit tagging for fish. As birds move close to a radio tower, they'll get a signal, and it tells us that bird's in the area. So it's really going to be helpful as our birds start migrating north and south each year. To date, we've picked up 8 different species. Some of those are ones we've caught. Some of those are just birds that happen to be passing by that were tagged somewhere else. So it's really good data, and we're really excited to see what information comes back from that effort. Our other biologists on the Great Salt Lake been working on surveys. So we just recently completed the Intermountain West Shorebird Survey. That's a west-wide survey that's done looking at shorebird populations. We also caught some pelicans last month or two. We attached 110 modus tags to those birds as well. So we've caught those on Gunnison Island and Hat Island. You probably heard about Hat Island in the news, where we recently just had a new colony start there again. So lots of good pelican work happening on the Great Salt Lake this year. And then we also hired a Great Salt Lake project leader. So this is a position that John Luff was formerly doing, and he's kind of moved into where he's supervising that program as well as our waterfowl people. And Kyle's going to essentially assume the role of overseeing the project. So we're excited to have him on board with us. In the law enforcement section, we have a new AIS specialist. That's Christian Knudsen. He started a couple months ago. We also want to just remind people about some of the new boating requirements here in Utah. We'll be putting on a pretty big law enforcement effort this weekend, looking for several different things. One of them is to make sure you've taken your course if you have a boat out there. And also if you have your $20 sticker for AIS. So if you need more information about that, go to that website, stdofthesea.utah.gov. You can get more information about that. I also want to mention that Chief Bubak was promoted to the DNR Deputy Director. He was a former officer and lieutenant here in our region, so we're excited to see him move on and doing good things. In our aquatic section, they've also been doing a lot of surveys, so we've been doing some cutthroat work on a variety of different streams in the Bear River and Weber drainages. We've also been doing summer gillnet surveys at Bear Lake, and then we've also been doing a zooplankton survey at Lost Creek and Smith and Morehouse. This is basically looking at the amount of food that's available in those water bodies for trout and salmon. So we're learning a lot there and looking forward to the results from that survey. We've also been doing a pretty cool project up in the forest at Tony's Grove at Logan Canyon. So if you've been up there in the last 10 years, you probably noticed that a lot of submergent vegetation has been creeping in along the edges and getting thicker each year. We went up there last week with the Forest Service and treated that. It's Eurasian milfoil. So you should start to see that dying off in the next couple of weeks and opening up a lot more water up there and probably less snags and just overall be a lot better for the fish in Tony's Grove. We've also been working on developing a stream habitat plan in our East Canyon Creek. That's on the 910 ranch that was recently just purchased by Summit County. So that we're trying to develop that into a better fishery, and we're working with them on some management activities up there and a plan. And then lastly, we've had a few of our biologists up helping in the Uintas this last couple days. They're treating the Oweep Basin and some other areas up on the north slope, I guess, doing a well-known treatment. And that's to put cutthroat back in some of those other drainages that haven't had them. Just a few other things going on in the aquatics program. We've got quite a few more surveys that'll be coming up. We'll be doing some work on Newton, Willard Bay, Bear Lake, Pine View, and also just remind people that kokanee spawn is going to be starting soon. So you'll start to see them moving up the waterway. So it's a cool time to get out and see some bright red salmon. In the outreach section, they did a pretty cool project a little while ago. They helped our aquatics people put in some habitat in Pine View. So on the south arm, they dropped these big gnarly looking things you see in these pictures. They provide really good protection and habitat for perch and crappie. Since that post, we've had about 190,000 views as of last week, which is awesome. And surprisingly, all the questions and comments have been pretty positive, which isn't always the case for a lot of our posts. So we're excited about that. We also just put on a pointing dog clinic at Ogden Bay. So Brett Wanacott, he's been a long time volunteer for us and has done this for a couple of years. He was able to help teach people how to train your dog to be a better hunting dog. So he had a great clinic out there. Another cool thing that's been going on in the region. So we recently just purchased 2,600 acres in July. And so this is something that Chelsea has actually been working on quite a bit. She did a great job helping us acquire this property. We'll be doing a ribbon cutting ceremony for it on September 17th. And it's a pretty cool property because it expands the footprint of our East Canyon WMA. It also essentially makes our properties and state parks contiguous. And so it's going to allow for some opportunities for state parks up there as well as for wildlife habitat. We've been doing some guzzler work. So we recently put in some chucker guzzlers as well as a big game guzzler on our Coldwater Canyon WMA. We also did some out on our promontory sheep facility. So we've got 2 new guzzlers out there as well. So that's kept our habitat section busy and providing water for a lot of animals out there. Lastly, our administrative section. So we have one more person we hired. That's Jen O'Leary. She was formerly one of our wildlife technician. She's worked for us for about 6 years and largely spent a lot of her time picking up dead animals. So she's decided to be in a different role now where she gets to kind of see the inner workings of how our administrative section works. So we're excited to have her as our office manager. Another thing to mention, we had a lot of dedicated hunters coming in and buying their hours this year. We've had up to about $14,000 that people have purchased so far. So either people have a lot more money or they're not checking all the projects that Jody's been working on. There's still some out there, so there's still time if you want to buy your hours. Check in on our dedicated hunter page and look for projects out there and get those done soon. The deer hunt's started and muzzleloader hunt's coming up pretty soon. We also wanted to mention that the Wildlife Board made some changes last week. If you have a tag for these 5 CWMUs, Deseret, Ensign Ranches, East Fork, Chalk Creek, Grass Valley, Clark Canyon, Weaver Florence Creek, Stillman Creek, you can purchase an additional cow elk tag on those CWMUs. But we would suggest talking with the operators first. It doesn't necessarily guarantee you any more time on the CWMU. So touch base with them before you purchase those. But that is an opportunity that's available now that the Wildlife Board made last week. Lastly, just a few things to go out and do with us if you're interested. We'll still be wrapping up some of our pronghorn elk classifications. So if you want to get out and participate in that, as I mentioned, a lot of aquatics work is going to be happening with gillnet surveys. And then our waterfowl crew will be spraying Phragmites for about another week if you want to get out and kill some frag. And other than that, that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you, Blair. Okay, that moves us on to agenda item number 5, Strawberry Reservoir response to illegal introduction of walleye with Alan Ward.
I'll
Or-
cover it for Alan
Okay,
tonight. My name is Trina Hedrick.
sorry.
I'm the Coldwater Sportfish Coordinator, as you said, so I can take any questions you might have.
The questions from the RAC. This one is just an informational.
I have a question.
Sure.
The little presentation talked about the nets that you'll be using to like capture the walleye? They were specialized for walleye? How are they specialized for walleye?
Not necessarily specific to walleye, but for the size of fish that we're expecting to
Okay.
catch, right? So as an illegal introduction, we're probably looking for bigger fish. So they increase the mesh size. And that way, anything smaller could just swim through. So it's a lot less bycatch for anything we might want in strawberry.
I was confused about how it was like specialized right for walleye. So thank you.
I guess I'll just ask, are they feeling more confident then that walleye is not going to be an issue then up at strawberries from what they've seen?
I'm going to
so
channel
far?
my inner Alan, and he's going to be super hesitant to express any confidence. He's going to say we have to be cautious. But no, I think that, I mean, it's certainly a good sign to do all of the eDNA and the gill netting work that they've done and still not see another individual. So we take that as a good sign, but we're not out of the woods yet. Just as an example, not to be negative, but the red fleet walleye illegal introduction, we saw one individual or two in 2006, and we didn't have a reproducing population that was detected in nets until 2012. We did not, however, do eDNA and sampling and that sort of thing, but there was some regular netting in between, but we didn't really see them coming on in force for a number of years.
It talks about that you guys have some of that study netting things going on through 2025. Will they continue to extend that then? If it didn't show up for so long at Red Fleet, is that talks to extend to make sure it doesn't become an issue later on down the road?
I think we'll have to talk about that, right? It's cost benefit. And if we're doing this intensive monitoring that we didn't do at Red Fleet, does that help? I mean, obviously it helps, but does that really cover us? How confident can we feel, a year out, 2 years out? So I think we just have to, we're meeting as a group within the agency to kind of talk about illegal introductions and our response to them in general, not just at Strawberry, because it does happen at other waters. So I think those conversations will help us answer questions like that.
Okay, any other questions on this one? Okay, this is an informational, but is there any questions from the public? Okay. Summarize public comments.
Okay, so we did have 5 comments on this agenda item. 40% of people strongly agreed with the informational, 20 somewhat agreed, and 40% were neutral. So average out is a combined average of 4. So some of the comments that we had, some people liked that there was no limit on walleye in these situations. We also had some comments about spearfishing and people wanting just more opportunity to take advantage of walleye when we have legal introductions. And some of the concerns were just for more regulations. And then also that if this leads to a rodent on treatment, people were concerned of what that may mean for fisheries if we have to go in and wipe out fish.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that's all for that agenda item. If there's no other questions. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item number 6, 2025 fishing recommendations and our 657-13 rule amendments. I'll stay with. You're
Yep.
still the star of the show.
Me again. Okay. So I just have a couple of things I'd like to say. I hopefully will be able to clarify a little bit of the process that we go through because what you saw online was the angler survey. That's kind of the last part of the process. So I wanted to talk a little bit about just the entire process that we go through. And then also a little bit about the Flaming Gorge regulations, because as you noticed, there's quite a few having to do with Flaming Gorge this year. So regulations are a critical tool used by DWR as part of our adaptive fisheries management approach. We propose regulations that are intended to help us achieve statewide and water body specific management objectives and help us maintain angler satisfaction in the face of ever increasing management challenges. Regulation proposals typically start years in advance within the regions with collection of gill netting or electrofishing type data, just fisheries surveys data. analysis of that data. So we're looking at catch rates, length frequencies, portional stock densities, things like that. We're evaluating whether those results mean that we're meeting or not meeting the goals and objectives for that water body. Then we also try to perform krill surveys on our more popular water bodies. At least once every 10 years, they're labor, time, money intensive, so we can't do them as often as we'd like. But these data provide angler usage, catch and harvest rates, what tackle or folks are using, and how they're targeting fish, where they're targeting fish, not the opinion data like we get from the online surveys, like you saw those results in the presentation. So we have all kinds of information that we're using, and this is years out, right? We typically discuss the results of our fisheries surveys with our angling public during management team or informal stakeholder meetings to aid us in development of regulation proposals. And then once developed, those proposed regulations are then put forward for assessment of public support via a survey emailed to over 25,000 licensed anglers. So the angler survey that provided the percent support that you see in the presentation was the culmination of many years of data collection leading up to these regulation proposals that you see in front of you. We do sometimes receive requests from anglers for regulations, and we have a few tonight that are a result of that. The bonus brook trout limit removal, some of the spearfishing changes, and the 6 lines through the ice at causey, porcupine, and pelican. But for the most part, these regulations are coming from biological data to start with. So just to sum that up, they start with biological data, an analysis of the right prescription to meet our goals that each water body has, and then they're vetted through the angler survey, just as a final measure to make sure that we are on the right track and that we're not totally off base. And then with our surveys, we are attempting to ensure that surveys provide an unbiased assessment of regulation proposals from the angling community. So we distribute these to randomly selected license holders. We literally assign random numbers and select those random numbers, and that's how people are chosen. In addition, we distribute the survey to various groups proportional to their representation among licensed Utah anglers. So for example, 15% of licensed anglers in Utah are female, so 15% of the 25,000 potential respondents were also female. The vast majority of anglers will not be surveyed in any given year as part of a random representative sampling effort, but we don't need every angler to respond. In fact, we only need less than 0.1% of Utah's 400,000 licensed anglers to respond for our results to be statistically valid. We are using, it's Dillman et al., Vasky et al., 2019. So we are using peer-reviewed published information to develop our survey protocols. It's not just me developing the protocol. If it was, then that would be a problem. But it's not, it's actual published information. So we had over 3,000 anglers responding to the survey, which is more than what we need. So we feel really confident that we have surpassed that minimum threshold needed for representative information. And then just to finish up with Flaming Gorge, you know, we most of what we do, all of what we do, right, with these management actions, whether they're regulations or what, we're just trying to provide Utah's anglers with the most satisfying fishing experience possible. In our effort to establish greater consistency across state lines on Flaming Gorge Reservoir, we think we'll do just that. Certainly, they're designed to do just that. Our belief is that consistency and regulations across state boundaries will minimize confusion and limit the likelihood of angler violations at Flaming Gorge. The Flaming Gorge regulation changes proposed for the 2025 rulebook are the culmination of nearly 8 years of negotiation and collaborative efforts. And it truly was a collaborative effort. I've been there from the start, and everyone has given a little, for sure. And I'm just really excited to present those to you because of my role in the process. So we really hope that those will meet with your approval. And that was all I was hoping to say. I'm definitely willing to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, we'll start off with any questions from RAC members.
Did I hear you correctly that protocol, less than 0.1% and the response rate is statistically valid?
Yes. And I'm
Wow.
sorry, I cannot answer any further questions because this is not my area of expertise. Just know that, like I said, it is not me developing these protocols. It's like statisticians that are super
Sure.
smart, and they're looking for, they're saying, yes, no information, you don't need a ton of responses, right? For the answers to even out and become representative and not skewed. The example that our statistician person used, and this makes perfect sense to me as a fisheries person, when we go out and sample a fish population of 200, 300,000 fish, we know there's a lot. We are going to get about 200 fish. We don't need to look at 200,000. We don't even need to look at 100,000. We can't, right? We don't have that kind of time. It's not a census. It's not even a major sampling effort. 200 fish in a population that size, 200,000 or so, is going to give us the length, frequency, distribution, the age and growth information that we need to make representative information. The key is the assumption that all individuals are sampleable and with equal probability.
Clearly, I'm not as smart as a statistician. I'm just blown away that less than 0.1% is viable. That just surprises me.
I can provide the papers. I don't know that I could understand them, but
Being somewhat of a nerd myself, I would be elated to read that. Yes,
okay,
please.
yeah, please send that. Sure.
I'd be curious to get that too.
Sure.
Because following somewhat of the statistics, I largely agree that what you've said and what you guys are following, the models are accurate. I do feel like we've seen a change societally where in some aspects, like I have a hard time 3,000 out of 400,000 people, just because we've seen societally where we're seeing the minority screaming the loudest, and those are the ones that are typically going to respond. And so I start to question now whether we're getting enough of a response with that low. That's why, for instance, on big game, everybody was such a big fan of it becoming mandatory. For everybody? Do we need everybody? No, but I think I would start to question whether we might need to send that. What does it hurt to send it to a few more people? Not all 400,000 people, right? But do we need to increase that a little bit? I think it makes sense because we've seen a shift societally to who's responding.
I guess I would, because I'm not the expert, I guess I would just ask that maybe just learn a little bit more. I'll send Blair those papers and he can send them out. Maybe take a look at those before any action is taken, just because it's legitimate. And I understand your concern, but that is 100% why we do the random selection of licensed anglers. So the fact that we have over 3,000 responding when we really only need 383 or so, that should take care of that response bias, because you have far more than the minimum that you need. So yeah, I guess just take a look first, and then if it still seems wonky, then we can have someone come talk to you who knows more than I do.
Are you guys going to look at all 3,000, or are you just going to take the 15% of that?
Yeah, 15% response rate was the 3,000 responses that we're talking about. So what we do is we take the information, we look at each regulation proposal one by one, and we basically just do a pivot table for each one, and we put in the information like, okay, what do all Utah anglers think? So all of the responses. Then you can also look at by county, you can look at by species preference group, you can look at by the type of angler they are, whether they use lures or bait or spearfishing or fly fishing. You can drill it down to, does this person or this group of responses, who are they mostly representing, right? Are they mostly fishing at larger water bodies? Are they mostly stream fishing? And so you can look at those. Sometimes though, you have to be careful because you might not have enough respondents. You might not have that target response. So that's why when you saw those percentages, it was always we did the lowest, right? So we just said, we looked at the species preference group, we looked at the county level, we looked at statewide, and we just presented the minimum response. So instead, like, let's say all Utah anglers were at 90% in support. Bluegill anglers at Pelican were at 85% support, maybe. And Uintah County residents were, let's say, 75%. Those weren't the right numbers, but just as an example, we would have said there was a minimum of 75% support. So everything, all of the other angler groups had a higher percent support than that. So we just presented you with that lowest one.
Any other questions from RAC members?
I have a question.
Sure.
I don't know much about fishing, so these are all the like little questions. There was talk about chumming. Can you talk about chumming? And it was illegal at Flaming Gorge in Utah, but not in Wyoming. And why would it be illegal in one? You know, why was it illegal in the first place?
Yeah, so with chumming, there's always been a concern over just aesthetics and also just unfairness, right? So we use it as a tool, though, like at Lake Powell, it's allowed. We use it as a tool where we allow anglers to chum where we need extra harvest. So that is the intent, right? To try to get more harvest of lake trout at Flaming Gorge by allowing chumming. So it could maybe draw the fish in, and folks would be more apt to have higher catch rates. The part of the proposal, as you saw, is to go to unlimited lake trout, less than 28 inches. So the combination of chumming and unlimited maybe can help us get some fish out of that system.
So will there be negative effects like the aesthetics of it? You talked about the aesthetics. I don't know.
I think that's just one of those concerns. I don't know how prevalent it was. It seems like most people probably won't even do this. Like, just for example, corn, right? When we said, let's think about allowing corn, and there was some concern, partly aesthetics and people just dumping their can of corn, and people don't really use corn anymore. Right. So it was one of those, we were the only state in the nation that didn't allow it. And it just seemed like a bygone era. Let's not even call it out. Right. So I'm not saying that chumming is to that extent, but just kind of an example. We just don't think it's going to be an issue. Wyoming allows it, and it's not been an issue there. So
With the Flaming Gorge, I know over the past number of years, we've seen continual increase in the focus in the harvest, basically the bag limit, possession limit of the lake trout, and opening it up under 28 inches. We had increased bag limit. Now we're to basically free for all under 28 inches. Have we been able to track how many more are being taken as we've expanded those regulations? Obviously, we're still not taking enough.
yeah, so with the krill survey that was completed in 2023, I think those data are still preliminary, but it did show, I know I can say that there's an increase in harvest rates for sure. We are also working on finishing up a study. Wyoming's got that data, and we hope to see that information this winter, where they're looking at the population estimate. We know it's definitely increased, and what is the exploitation rate that we actually need to make that impact, right? So we're not trying to drive the population to extinction, right? But we have these fisheries models that we can look at how much exploitation do we need to get the size back up to something that's more acceptable.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, we're just waiting for that target, I guess, is the way to say that. And we definitely need more angler harvest. So we're also going to do some outreach, obviously, and just try to continue to get the word out. They've done a great job, I think, up there, getting the word out through all of their efforts. But there's just more work to be done.
That was my next question, is where's our goal and when we're going to get there? Do we know when that data is going to be out from Wyoming? Is it like within a year? Is it?
It should be within the year. The last time I asked, they were hopeful that we would see that information this winter.
Okay. Thank you.
Again, it's a complex fishery, and throw in another state. What's the target around the lake trout? Is it to try to improve the trophy lake trout that we're catching? Is it trying to improve kokanee salmon? Like what's kind of some of the goals in the management of that?
Both of those. So Wyoming has seen a decline in trophy lake trout, and trying to prevent that. We're trying to bring back those growth rates to get fish into that larger size. So that would happen by reducing the number of smaller lake trout to reduce competition and get them past that 28-inch mark. But yes, they also will go up to the inflow area of Flaming Gorge and just chow down on kokanee. I think it's probably age 1, maybe age 2 as well. So it definitely has an impact. I think that's partly what we saw. Certainly it was partly because of reservoir levels in the last couple of years, but also because lake trout predation as well on juvenile fish where they're overlapping extensively. So it's a problem for both, and our goals are both, right? We're trying to maintain our kokanee fishery and also try to improve the size, structure, and growth of our lake trout.
What are the burbot or whatever they're called? What do they primarily target as far as what fish are they impacting the most, and how's that going with?
This is an interesting dynamic, actually, with what Wyoming is seeing up there. So burbot love crayfish, and they'll eat smallies, but they just love crayfish, and so do smallies, right? So there's a definite competitive interaction there that has not been beneficial to smallmouth. It's been more beneficial to burbot. But interestingly, those lake trout in the inflow seem like they might be eating burbot in the inflow as well. And the smallmouth are starting to come back in the inflow, which is really exciting. So don't take that direct correlate or that direct result to the bank just yet. It's still kind of preliminary, but I'm just really excited about it. I think it's great news that the smallmouth are coming back, and that maybe having a few more lake trout in the reservoir could be a help with our burbot issue. But again, these are preliminary data. It's just something that we're kind of watching unfold. It's really interesting.
Do we have any estimates on, I think it was last year, we're seeing kind of a reduction in kokanee. Is it 5%, 10%? What are we estimating we're seeing?
I don't know the percentage, to be honest, but we did see in our hydroacoustics, so that looks at the smaller fish, the young of year, age 1 fish, seeing another reduction. So we're hopeful that, maybe it's a change in behavior. We did see kokanee behaving differently and moving to different parts of the reservoir with the lake level fluctuations. Maybe there's still a leftover from that. We're still hopeful, but we are still concerned. And we'll just have to see how the run does. Alan, like I was channeling my inner Alan, right, with uncertainty, and you can't pin those guys down on how the run's going to do. They don't want to kokanee are just they're highly variable, right? So we'll just have to see. The data are not overly promising, but we can still be hopeful.
Okay. Any questions from the public at this time? Okay. We'll move on to summarize public comments.
Okay, so we had 16 responses for this agenda item. 69% of those strongly agreed with the regulations. 6 somewhat agreed, and then 19 strongly disagreed. So that was a weighted average of 4.06. And then going to the comments, we had a lot of comments out there talking about spearfishing opportunity. So a lot of people interested in just finding more ways to enjoy spearfishing in Utah. Some of the other comments suggested that they didn't want to see a limit on walleye in the Provo River. Someone commented that only the 2-pole restriction for ice fishing should exist statewide except for Flaming Gorge. We had someone talk about largemouth bass and wanted to see lower limits to reduce overharvest of larger fish. Some concerns about spearfishing during the walleye spawn, and then some concerns about the 20-foot line regulation at Flaming Gorge for spearfishing, and we're confused as to why that may even be needed.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to public comment. We have 4 comment cards on this agenda item. Let's start with Ben Allen. If you'll come up to the microphone, please state your name. Individuals are given 3 minutes. Those representing groups will be given 5 minutes.
Thank you. for letting me address you. As you said, Ben Allen, I'm an avid sport fisherman in the state of Utah, have been for quite a while. I have opinions on all the regulation changes, but in simplicity, we're just going to focus on the spearfishing, which is the ones that caught my attention the most. And I'll just read my statement. As an avid walleye angler and multi-species angler in the state of Utah, I feel the need to voice my concerns over the newly proposed spearfishing regulations, changes for the upcoming seasons. Even though the number of spearfishermen in Utah is incredibly small in comparison to total licensed anglers, I feel they pose a considerable risk to the brood stock, trophy, and big fish populations in the state. It is apparent that spearfishermen prefer to target the largest members of all species based on their social media posts, tournaments, and the 13 new state records posted in just the last 7 years, 9 of which being warm water species, compared to just 6 for the old regulations, the old record changes. The largest fish are almost always female and critical to the future recruitment of populations of species that are not stocked and depend completely on natural reproduction. I feel it is very unethical to hunt and involuntarily remove such important fish from a water body that depends on them. Walleye specifically grow slowly, and a large trophy-sized fish over 28 inches is easily 10 to 15 years old and difficult to replace in a water body, and produces millions of eggs, right, for the recruitment of the species. It is because of this risk that I feel it necessary for the state to impose specific restrictions on newly proposed regulation changes. My suggestions are as follows. Spearfishing should not be allowed at night. This is because spearfishing at night automatically necessitates the use of artificial light and creates an unethical advantage over species like bass, walleye, trout, and other game species that frequent the shallows at night, where spearfishermen frequent. If allowed to spearfish at night, I believe carp and chub should be the only legal species to target. My second recommendation, spearfishing should be closed to the walleye spawn, just as it is currently closed for the bass spawn, namely on water bodies, Willard Bay, Echo Reservoir, Deer Creek Reservoir, Utah Lake, Starvation Reservoir, Big Sand Wash Reservoir, and Yuba Lake should be closed March 1st until the fourth Saturday in May. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we'll have Greg Moore, followed by Ken Strong.
So I prepared a statement because I suck at public speaking. First of all, I want to make it clear, I'm not against anyone pursuing the passion or their craft. I'm not arguing against spearfishing. However, I believe there should be such check and balances that when it comes to taking a fish in the sport of spearfishing. I think the new proposed regulations allowing spearfishing at night with artificial light to target chubs only opens up a can of worms. From a walleye angler's perspective, this regulation change is specifically targeted to exploitation of walleye. During the spring, walleye are vulnerable. This is especially true at Deer Creek and Starvation. Walleye gather in huge schools in the same location year after year. These large females are easily targeted for spearfishing. They don't spook easily and can be taken at will. Additionally, there is no law enforcement at night. I feel we are giving the fox the keys to the henhouse by implementing the use of artificial lights at night for spearfishing. I'm personally against the regulation change allowing spearfishing at night with artificial light and is because it's not enforceable, for one. And it leaves the door open for exploitation of the walleye population. I'm asking for I would ask for a compromise, close Starvation, Deer Creek, and other walleye water bodies to all spearfishing from March 1st through May 15th. We protect the bass and trout. Why are we not protecting the walleye? That's it.
Thank you. Ken Strong, followed by Jackson Hink.
Ken Strong, representing United Parcel Service. I also want to represent United Parcel Service. I worked there for too long. Sportsman for Fish and Wildlife. I also am representing Utah Anglers Coalition. I don't know if you got a letter from them, but Utah Anglers Coalition is a coalition of anglers from all over the state, from everything from bass fishermen, trout fishermen, fly fishermen, all kinds of stuff. They meet together monthly and discuss stuff. And in there, and when we discussed this, we met with Craig Walker and Trina on the proposal for the fish changes. And we were unanimous on everything but one thing, and that was the ice hole. We agreed with everything else. The ice hole is what I want to talk about today. If you look at Flaming Gorge, the deeper side is down by the dam. It's shallower up in Wyoming, and it freezes faster, and sometimes on the south end, it doesn't freeze down by the dam. When you talk, you've already got it, and I know we're trying to agree with Wyoming, but if you look at it, an 18-inch hole, how big do you need to get a fish through? And with this change, you can cut as big a hole as you want, and you're taking your kids out there on the ice to fish. It's a safety issue. So we're definitely opposed to changing the rule on the size of an ice hole. We agree with everything else, but we do not want the change in the ice hole. We want it to remain the same now. And that's for safety's sake. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. You're the first one who's ever represented United Parcel Service. Jackson Hink.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jackson Hink. I am the spokesperson as well as the co-founder of my company. It's called Get Out and Play. We promote just getting out in the wilderness, enjoying what everything, the world has to offer. So I'll get right into this. Unfortunately, I have been preparing for this for weeks now. I've got a big paper here. Didn't realize I was confined to a few short minutes, so I'm going to speak as fast as I can. I was born and raised here in northern Utah. I've been fishing ever since I could hold a rod. Over the years, I've caught literally thousands of fish here in Utah. When I was 18, I moved to St. George, and I found a hobby that has consumed most of my time and energy and money, bass fishing. These intelligent, patient, unpredictable fish have captivated me for many years. I've competed in tournaments with the BASS Association as well as SUBA. I'm a current member of the Ultimate Bass Team Tour here in Utah. My pursuit of largemouth has taken me to waters across Utah, California, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, and Wyoming. And I've seen firsthand the effects of both good and poor fish management. A little background: for the past century, my family has been breeding, selling, and racing horses. The horse business is driven by bloodlines and lineage, with the genetics of each horse playing a critical role in determining its racing potential and value. Some colts are purchased for upwards of $50,000 before they're even born, solely based on their pedigree. Now, like horses, these largemouth bass populations can thrive or suffer based on how we promote and preserve desirable genetics in the current population. I know that here in Utah, largemouth get slipped a little bit on the totem pole, and understandable. We don't have the greatest habitat here for them. I'm purely after protecting what we have here now. I believe that existing as well as the new changes to the fishing regulations will be detrimental to the quality of fishing here in Utah. Specifically, my concern is with the bass harvesting changes to Gunlock Reservoir, which will be 6 largemouth of any size, Sand Hollow Reservoir, 8 largemouth of any size, and Quail Creek Reservoir of 6 largemouth of any size. If the larger fish are consistently harvested before they can breed, the genetic traits associated with the larger fish may be removed from the population completely. I'd like to talk a little bit about selective breeding and stocking programs. Now, this methodology is effective in other states in the U.S., but at this time, I'm not saying that Utah needs to follow suit here. I'm purely using these to show the importance of protecting and preserving the genetic makeup of big largemouth bass. One of the most effective ways to manage the genetics of fish populations are through selective breeding and stocking programs. These programs involve breeding fish that exhibit desirable traits such as large size and releasing the offspring into the lake to enhance the genetic diversity and potential population. In 1986, the Texas Parks and Wildlife created the Share Lunker program. This program partners with the anglers of Texas to preserve and improve the state's great bass fishing. The program allows successful fishermen to return any largemouth bass that is 13 pounds or greater back to the state. In return, the state gives the angler a fish replica mount and a chance to compete or contribute in their breeding program. The Share Lunker program then breeds these largemouth together to create these desirable offspring to reintroduce into the waters of Texas. It's been incredibly successful. They have received about 650 largemouth now over 13 pounds, implying a healthier and larger population of fish. In the last year or so, it was proven through DNA testing that Share Lunker number 583, caught out of Lake I think it's pronounced Nacogdoches, is a sixth generation. What was that? Thank you. Is a sixth generation granddaughter to Share Lunker number 9, caught in 1989 in Gibbons Creek Reservoir. Unfortunately, some states have encouraged the opposite behavior. Historically, 20 of the 25 biggest largemouth ever caught have been caught in California, and among these six of those 20 have come from a single lake. California does not have a program here to maintain the genetic quality, and as a result, the limited fish population is confined to their respective lake. These problems have been compounded with the reputation of the lake, where most anglers tend to keep these mega-sized fish. Whether they're keeping them for eating, pictures, or trophies, these fish are usually harvested and will never produce again. The results of these decisions are apparent. It has now been 18 years since the last giant was seen in California. So in conclusion here, my concern is that the bass fishing qualities of the 3 major lakes down there in St. George, southern Utah, will be negatively impacted by these. It's my strong opinion that the next state record largemouth will be caught out of Gunlock Reservoir. I've spent hundreds of hours at this lake. I've seen the effects of what good management has done to this lake. It's made an incredible comeback since 2015 when it was treated with, I forget how you pronounce that, retinone.
Retinone.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up your comments, please.
Yes, sir. I'm suggesting that we introduce a slot limit for these bass. Instead of opening them up for any size, there are plenty of charts out here with data that project a relative weight to length. I think 12 inches is too small, which is what it's been in the past. Nobody wants to take the time to clean a 1 pound largemouth. It's not worth it. A 16-inch largemouth on average is about 2.5 pounds. That's plenty worth it, while still being able to keep our large genetics in our lake and not about harming our fisheries. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's all we have for public comments. So open it up for RAC discussion. Any clarifying questions for the division?
I feel like I'm also not an angler. So I sometimes struggle with concepts of why things are put into place. And I'm really curious why spearfishing at night was even discussed. It seems counterintuitive to me, but again, I don't know the science behind it. So I'm just curious if you could maybe explain why that was put in.
Yeah, I did want to clarify that. So just to be clear, we are proposing to open spearfishing 24 hours a day. The use of artificial light while spearfishing will only be allowed for common carp, Utah chub, burbot, and lake trout at Flaming Gorge Reservoir. So it's not open to, the use of artificial light is not open to all species everywhere, just those 2 non-game, and then just those 2 game species at Flaming Gorge where we would like more harvest.
Sure. And thank you for clarifying that. To follow up, just because again, I'm not sure, the comment was made that there's not law enforcement at night. So how is that regulated if no one's there to regulate it at night?
So when we were looking through the guidebook, it just seemed like it was, in terms of simplifying the guidebook, that is something that we could just do away with, simply because if you cannot use artificial light to spearfish, you can't see anything. So even on a full moon, it is really dark. So it's going to be self-regulating. People might be able to spearfish later into the evening, but we don't expect there to be this mad rush to spearfish at night. And we'll just have to keep tabs on it, you know, through Facebook and other venues like that. But that was just an effort actually to simplify the guidebook.
I have a little bit of a concern with it just because, again, how much enforcement are you going to have? It's how do I keep honest people honest, right? I mean, I don't think we're going to be able to have officers out there watching waters, seeing if there's light. I do have some concerns. I just don't know that I think eliminating and making it 24 hours, I get for the most part, right? I'm not a fan of making rules for the 1%, right? To stop the 1%, but I also just go, man, are we opening, as we say, are we opening the doors to keep honest people from being honest at times? And I just, in the protection, if we're looking at the protection of the wildlife and the fish specifically in this situation, if I'm applying it to big game hunting, right? There's a reason why there's certain technologies and restrictions we have with big game hunting. I don't know why we don't apply that maybe the same way.
Well, just a reminder that most anglers are allowed to fish at night, right? And it's just, you know, safety is on your own, right? And also making sure that you don't over harvest. That's your responsibility. So they are a small group of anglers, and they just, you know, we're just asking people like the rest of the anglers who use normal techniques, it's on your honor, you know, just do the right thing. But yeah, they're also anglers. They're just practicing their sport, and they are a very small group as well. So other anglers are allowed to fish at night. So
like some of my fellows up here, I'm not an avid fisher person. You said other types of fishing are allowed to fish at night?
I mean, you can go out and fish at night. Yeah, we fished Starvation Reservoir for walleye in the shallows. Like, you can go fish at night. It's safety it's on your own. Following the law, it's on your own, right? Starvation may not be the greatest example. They do have park rangers that'll respond to things, but I'm sure that it's more noise complaints. It's not necessarily fishing.
So just so I'm wrapping my mind around this correctly. So then by allowing the spear fishing at night would bring it into more parity with the other types of fishing that are allowed at night.
Right. And they still have the same bag limit that all other anglers do.
Can I ask a biological question? So, for example, songbirds migrate at night. Is there an advantage to fishing at night? Is there something happening at night with certain species of fish, or thinking about like spawn that is more like kind of prime time is night? I'm just curious.
Yeah, some fish will move into the shallows at night, like targeting walleye, just normal angling, right? Like just a jig and a worm. If you're fishing from shore, you're more likely to be able to catch them if you're there at night, because that's when they feel more comfortable moving into the shallows, just as an example.
Safer.
So that it's definitely species specific, but it does happen, yes.
Okay. I was curious. That's fascinating. Okay, great. This is why I should come to meetings very often. I ask a lot of these questions.
We had a few comments online, some shared tonight. I forgot to go look it up. Do we put angling restrictions on the walleye spawn at Starvation and some of those others? I mean, at Willard, we've closed the channel on dates.
Yeah,
the other
there's
lakes.
those, but no, there's no restriction for spear angling, for spear fishing walleye during the spawn.
I mean, I guess
others.
just standard angling during the
Yeah.
walleye spawn.
I think
Is there
it's the
anything?
Provo River Delta,
Yeah.
and Willard. There might be a few others, but
Okay.
Oh, it doesn't. Oh, thank you, Clint. So it's Provo River Delta.
The other clarifying questions?
I have a question. If I'm a regular angler
angler fishing at night? Can I use the spotlight to shine on the water?
There are restrictions and you'd have to check the guidebook. So,
Oh.
yeah, so no, I don't think that's the case. I think there's restrictions
Well, I have a
there.
problem with the whole spotlight thing regardless.
But that's only for certain types of fish, correct?
So for the
Carp.
spear fishing, you're allowed to use light, artificial light underwater for common carp in Utah chub anywhere, and for lake trout and burbot at Flaming Gorge.
See, I think if you start talking about that, then you're going to be dealing with bow fishermen, like
Yeah.
with platforms and like, I think the whole light thing gets into a interesting, because I used to shoot fish a lot at night, and it was completely different to see fish at night than it was during the day. It was a whole nother world that was happening from midnight until 4 o'clock in the morning. And so I think it's good. For the removal of fish, but after hearing some of the public comments, and I think there needs to be some regulations put on. We don't want to be stressing out other fish if they're spawning and doing certain things. So I would like to see a little bit more clarification made on the whole use of lights, because I know that that's a big no-no in the big game world. And so I feel like we should.
It is covered in the guidebook. I just don't recall the specifics at this time, but it is covered in the guidebook. So before we.
I also don't see a huge issue with the law enforcement out at night. I mean, I feel like a lot of us are outdoorsmen, and how many times do you get checked a year, whether you're deer hunting or elk hunting or fishing? It's not a lot, and it's kind of nice to know that you don't have someone watching over your back all the time. And like she said, I think rules are put in place, and we need to govern ourselves on that. It's good to have them there to enforce it. It needs to happen, but as public landowners and stewards of the land, we should be doing our part.
But I'm assuming there's like a tip line like there is for poaching. If someone sees something fishing wise in a situation like that, right?
Yeah, it's the poaching hotline.
What on the bass stuff, why no slot limit?
So I was thinking this might come up just based on the comments that were submitted. So I did ask our regional manager to put together the harvest information from their latest creel surveys. Some of them were more recent than others, but so Sand Hollow, the catch rate was a little over 1 fish per hour. The harvest rate was 0.06 fish per hour. 5% of bass caught were harvested. So their new management objective is greater than 10%. So basically, especially at Sand Hollow, that was the one where the proposed increase was up to 8. What they're seeing is very slow growth because there's too many fish to feed in that system. So yeah, it's just about opening it up opportunity for harvest, knowing that people probably still aren't going to harvest, but hopefully with some outreach and education, we can let folks know what really needs to happen. It's not fish getting picked off, it's just fish are not growing. So their number for a year-long, or no, sorry, it was a 6-month creel, 4,800 bass were harvested, 97,000 were caught. That's a lot of mouths to feed. Quail Creek, the catch rate was pretty low. Harvest rate was even lower, 0.003 fish per hour. 130 bass were harvested at Quail Creek in 12 months. All were less than 12 inches. At Gunlock, catch rate was 0.43 fish per hour. Harvest rate was 0.009. This was a 5-month creel and 17 bass were harvested. So in the fisheries world, you've got a lot of fish in a system and it's a lot of mouths to feed. And if you're not taking some out, then they're just going to compete with one another and they won't be able to get past a certain size. And that's what they're seeing in these water bodies. So I certainly appreciate Jackson's passion and interest, and I certainly understand everyone's concern, but the data don't show that it's the large ones getting picked off.
I think it's great that there's some smart people that know what they're talking about, that are out every day, as long as with you guys, with all of your information. So this is a 2-year plan.
There
For
are-
25, 26?
Yeah, we're on a 2-year cycle.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, we see that we keep relating things to the big game world, and I think sometimes ours are on 3-year, but all this stuff should be monitored pretty closely over that 2-year plan to see if it has an effect, good or bad. And we know that things will bounce back. But I don't think a 2-year plan's I think that's a very reasonable time to put something into place to see if it's going to work or not work.
Why what's the reasoning behind the removing the ice hole size at Flaming Gorge?
Yeah, so that is an effort to come into line with Wyoming Game and Fish, partially just looking at or listening to what they had to say about why they have no restriction. They've never had a restriction. They just don't have problems. Their problem on Flaming Gorge Reservoir is pressure ridges and people crossing pressure ridges and getting into a pickle in that way. So it's not been the size of the ice hole. In fact, my counterpart there just thought, that, you still have the same size augers, right? You still have 8, 10, 12-inch augers that people are using. And they figure out ways to get the big fish through. So they might have to expand a little bit, but are they really punching out, multiple holes to get a really huge hole? They just aren't seeing that. And they aren't seeing the issues either. So there's concerns from the public, and we are aware of that and definitely sensitive to that, but we don't think it's going to be a problem.
Have they had any that they could say accidents where somebody's fallen through the ice due to a hole size on the Wyoming size?
I think people probably fall through.
I'm talking hole specific, right? There's obviously thin ice, weak ice, right? Ridges that they talk about. I'm talking specific. Is there any incidents that they can say, hey, this was attributed to somebody decided to cut out a big section of ice and it left it exposed? It maybe was covered up by snow and somebody didn't know it was there and fell through type.
He said in their collective memory, so he asked multiple people, they knew of no such incident. But I will say, kids go through ice holes, hopefully it's just 1 foot, right? But those are 8-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch, certainly an 18-inch hole. So, but no, they've not had any reports like that in their collective knowledge, memory.
Okay. Any other clarifying questions? Okay. Yeah, we are under RAC discussion now, so sorry, you got a second round of questions after all that. So open it up for more discussion.
I was really intrigued with the comments about the genetic testing in Texas and what they were able to determine with those bass. That I don't know. Obviously tonight, I don't think there's a lot we can do about that, but that sounded exciting to me just listening, hearing that. That was stuff I wasn't aware of. It'd be exciting to be able to say things like that about our fisheries and have that kind of data.
There's definitely genetic research ongoing in a lot of different locations. So, and I think you could say this with a lot of species, but certainly black bass, especially when they're on their nest, there are individuals that are more aggressive than others. If you pull an individual off his nest and he's super aggressive, right? Maybe you take him back or remove him for whatever reason, and he doesn't get back to his nest in time. His nest, it's just maybe complete failure. And so that particular year, he's not contributing anything to the gene. So that is a real thing, right? Where you can affect the aggressiveness of a population over time potentially, because those aggressive ones, the ones that we all like to see in there, they're the ones that are hitting the lures. They're the ones that are aggressively clearing things off of their nests. So it is, we do know that that happens in a lot of Centrarchid populations, and it's something that we do need to be aware of for sure.
Any other discussion from RAC members?
I mean, it seems to me that there are genuine concerns that have been expressed, including wanting to grow the large fish and gun lock and including preventing some of this. But it really seems to me that by and large, these regulations have been well thought out, number one. Number two, that really the issues that we're concerned with here that we've heard are going to be fairly minimal. I would personally support approving the proposed changes.
Any other discussion?
I think James made a good point. I mean, this is a 2-year, but from listening and watching videos and discussions here, I mean, this is some of these years in the making to come to these proposals. I don't know that I'd see anything that would be, I think there's some valid concerns I appreciate, because other than I fly fish and then just the good old standard, throw a power bait or spinner here and there type person. But I know sport fishing in Utah is becoming, for sports fish, specifically bass and walleye, is growing, quite significantly. And so and maybe a comment in future, there was a lot in your proposal, and maybe in future years, as we ask for the big game side of things, to maybe break it up into a couple different little sections. It might make it easier for us on some of these and some of these discussions. But anyways, I just think with what's been proposed, I think with it being kind of a 2-year type plan, I would think that would give us data to be able to make future decisions and changes if needed.
Okay, I think we're to the point of entertaining a motion.
I'd move that we approve the proposed changes to Utah's fishing regulations 2025.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Robert, second by Nikki. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, call for a vote. Marshall.
Yes.
Ryan.
Yes.
Jamie.
Yes.
James.
Yes.
Robert.
Yes.
Darren.
Yes.
Jessica.
Yes.
Nikki.
Yes.
And Ross.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes care of agenda item 6. We will move on to agenda item number 7. R657-61, valuation of real property interest for purposes of acquisition or disposal rule amendments. We should have shortened the name on that one. Chelsea Duke.
I hope you saw in my presentation that I do recommend a change to the title because it is too long.
Hey, any clarifications or summary from your presentation?
Yes, please. I just wanted to take just a few minutes to run through a couple of things. For the most part, the meat of this rule, if you will, has not changed. I think structural wise, you'll see a lot of red. We're trying to separate out this rule to make distinct categories for when the division acquires land, when the division disposes of land, and when the division exchanges land, and just streamline this process as well as definitions. One thing that I did touch on in my presentation that I wanted to expand on a little bit further for you, after after some questions that came out from the Central Region RAC. So in the proposed changes, we do add a section that talks about, in the disposal section specifically, that the division may not dispose of real property without first obtaining written approval of persons or entities, if any, holding contractual funding or proprietary interest in real property. I wanted to specify that because there was some questions and valid concerns about when the division may dispose of real property that we own. And so this addition, this is already something that we need to do, but I like having it in rule so that way it's specifically stated. Most of the property that the division owns, I'll say roughly 85% of the property that the division owns, was purchased using federal funds. So that excise tax from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, most of our properties were purchased with that money. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does have very restrictive restrictions on properties that say when the division could dispose of those. And so I just wanted to clarify that on those properties, we have to get permission from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and go through quite rigorous process in order to dispose of property. So if we are utilizing that property still for wildlife purposes, it's off the table. The Fish and Wildlife Service will not allow us to dispose of that. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit more than I did in my presentation. Thank you. Happy to answer other questions.
Hey, thank you. Open it up for questions from the RAC.
I'm just, from what you just covered, what's your definition of for real estate purposes, or excuse me, for wildlife purposes that you have to get approval for? Because my biggest thing is just that the disposal is for anybody public lands. It's okay. Why are we getting rid of public land? So I guess what's your definition that would fall into that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So I will just start off by saying we don't do this very often. So we do have to have a rule about it, but we don't dispose of property very often. And specifically, the Fish and Wildlife Service has this regulation about when we can and can't dispose of the property when it's not being utilized for wildlife purposes. And the definition, if you will, is the purpose for which we bought the property. So if we bought the property, let's say for big game winter range and public access, let's say that. One of our big WMAs that has a lot of hunting opportunities and we use for big game winter range. If the property is still serving that specific purpose, if there is still big game wintering on that property, or if we are still allowing public access on that property, it would still be considered for the purpose for which we purchased it, and we wouldn't be able to dispose of that. So if it's still serving that function, then it's off the table for disposition. And so the example that I would give is in the northern region, we have a piece of property that we were given by the federal government, the General Service Administration, as mitigation. And it's a tiny little 2-acre piece of property that has a pond, if you will. I won't really call it a pond, but it's a hole in the ground that has collected with water. And it's right off a frontage road, and it's surrounded by development. So you can't hunt there because of the homes in the area, and you can't get there. There's no legal access. So we would consider that a property that would be up for disposal because there was no wildlife values to that property and no options for public recreation. So that's an example of a time that we would consider disposition.
So and I don't know if there is any, but if there's any land that's been acquired, let's say it was just solely for the purpose of public access to more public lands, like through northern Utah is going to be a lot of the places, right? It's all private land. They're able to purchase a section to give access for public. At that point, then they could never essentially dispose of that land because it was purchased for access.
Correct.
Okay.
Marshall, you got a question?
Yes, thank you. Will this affect internal transfers of property along those lines that the previous question was addressing? You know, if access was well served by managing the property outside of a wildlife management agency, but still internal to the state for recreation access, is that considered a disposal?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're asking if the division would no longer be the holder of that property, but let's say another state agency would that could be considered a disposal?
Correct.
Okay. Yes, that would still be considered a disposal, but there are times where something like that may be required. But if it was purchased by the division for wildlife purposes or recreation, then it needs to stay in our hands.
That makes sense.
Any sort of disposition, especially by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, would be off the table.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. Thanks.
Any other questions from RAC members? Okay. Questions from the public? Okay. Summarize public comments.
Hey, so we had 7 responses to this agenda item. We had 57% who strongly agreed, 43% who are neutral, and that was it. So it's a weighted average of 4.1. We also had one comment, and that comment was basically just asking us to work with other groups when we purchase properties for WMAs. I don't know if that was other land management agencies or conservation groups or what, but just comment specific to working with others.
Okay, thank you. We don't have any public comment cards for this agenda item, so move on to RAC discussion.
Well, basically, reading through that and the legalese and all that goes with that, it makes sense. These are clarification kinds of things in large part. And I don't know, it's going to make it more efficient, in my view.
Okay.
I think someone should come up with a much shorter name. Yeah, any recommendations?
The proposed name change is acquisition, disposal, and exchange of real property.
It's part of the proposal.
Yeah. Okay.
Still pretty long.
I tried.
Good.
I'll think of one.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve basically the changes is proposed.
Second.
Okay, motion by Ross, seconded by Marshall. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, we'll call for a vote. Marshall,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
James,
Yes.
Robert,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
Jessica,
Yes.
Nikki, Ross.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Hey, that is our last agenda item. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
By raise of hands. Hey, we are adjourned.